Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to what I'm thinking is going to be a short happy hour, but maybe not. We are putting a quick pause on the Sex and the City just because chaos ensues during election times and holiday times and all the times. Chaos. But I did want to kind of talk about a personal experience. I haven't talked about like my adoption stuff in a while or identity stuff in a while. So I was going to kind of bring that up because I had an interesting weekend, Anney. So the election is upon us, and my family has gone through some stuff physically, with health-wise, and things have been kind of not in disarray. I think we're coming off of that. We're coming into like progress mode and all that. But all that to say is I have spent a lot more time with my family, specifically my parents and aunts who I haven't seen in years, which is my bad. Like I have to process how I see family a lot of the times because of my adoption stuff. And especially during election times, heated election times. As I've talked before, my family is very conservative. Myself and my niece are the only ones to come out leaning left. And my niece, her stuff has been recent and since her experience in college and being in Atlanta and meeting the people she has, which I love for her. And she's having to navigate her own family in these times. So a lot. It's a lot when it comes to my family. Being on a intersectional feminist podcast, leaning very far left in my political views and all of that has kind of put a wedge in my relationship with my family. Y'all know that I went through a whole thing about my book. My family still doesn't know that I've written a book. Like that, things that would have been celebrated in the other family most of the times, not so much for my family. And it could be, honestly, my cowardice in all of this. Anney, you and I have talked about that a lot, like things that I don't want to face because the few times that I have talked openly has not gone well, to the point that we've kind of all agreed we would never bring the stuff up. My dad will bring it up every now and again, just asking how my job went, what's going, and all of that. But so there's a lot to be left, I guess, unsaid. All of that to say, the elections are upon us. I had hope for a second that my parents, especially my family in general, weren't diehard supporters of Trump. And I still don't know for sure because we haven't brought it up. We haven't had that conversation. There are things that I found on social media, which I don't really follow my family. I either like unfollow them, that we're still like connected but not following each other, or I just don't. Like my mother now has Facebook and I was like, why? I actually got very mad at her and like went off to the point she said something to my sister. And I was like, why would y'all let her do this? Because she has admitted to me previously when we went through some really rough patches in conversation that she needs to stay away from the news because she's being fed a lot of information that she doesn't know if it's true. And she knows that it has really, really tainted her views on a lot of things, including name calling me. So a lot of those things have happened. And so I was very upset that she was on Facebook because I was really worried what that would do for her mindset, what misinformation she was going to get, and how this was going to affect our relationship. Because again, I love my family. Y'all, I ride hard for my family in that I will protect them. I will make sure that no one, you can't on my family. I can on my family. You can't, type of conversation. But I also absolutely know that they have really harmful views and takes on things, thinking that they're doing this in good light. So with all of that, I've discovered that my brother has a picture of supposedly that assassination attempt of Trump during one of his rallies where he, did the fist pump, Anney. He has that as a profile picture. So like, oh my God. Oh my God. Are you idealizing this man because he got shot at? And don't get me wrong, that's bad. I will always hold to, don't do this. Violence is awful. But also idealizing them and putting them on a pedestal, absurd. absurd. But again, so I'm a little worried about what that looks like. I have not brought this conversation up. I will say for the most part, the brother who did this has not said anything to me, has not provoked me. Used to, once upon a time, he would, and we would go back and forth and banter a little bit. But since Trump, that has not happened. I don't think we can banter. I don't think it can be a friendly thing. So with all of that, I was going to see my family this weekend, and I was going to see my mom and dad because I haven't seen them in a couple of weeks. I didn't. I wanted to talk with them, make sure everything was okay, getting updates on everything that was happening with them and the rest of the family. And I purposely did it where I didn't have to see my siblings just because I'm a little worried. At the same time, my mom sends out hey, we're doing a fall get-together this at the same weekend, and you should all come, and we're going to do these things. And I had a full-fledged anxiety attack where it kept me up at night, going back and forth about what excuses I can make for coming the day before and not the day that she wants the festival, all these things, because I did not want to deal with so close to election, any conversation that could go near that topic. Again, I go back and forth because I know a lot of people, activists in general, especially as loud as we are on our own activism, go back and forth about, well, you should be educating your parents, you should be talking to your parents and all these things. And I can't. Like, when I say that the anxiety was so high in seeing my family because of this, anxiety is already high in general because we're waiting with bated breath about what's going to happen with our future, right?
Yeah.
But the anxiety of having to confront my family in this moment, knowing that it is only going to ruin our relationship, which feels like it's on thin ice as it is, makes it even harder. It's like in general to have this conversation. And because of the few conversations that didn't even really have to do with the election, put us in such a state that it felt like I was going to lose my entire family. Like that's what it feels like. And so I go back and forth with that because I feel like I am betraying my morals at the same time trying to keep the peace with my family so that I can keep my family. Does that make sense?
Yes. I do not think you're alone. And I think that some of us have learned the hard way. There's just people you're not going to convince. It doesn't mean you can't say nothing.
Right.
But that pressure to be like the one who turns them around.
Right.
I don't think for some, if you like know the person you're talking to and you know they're entrenched, I would say like pick your battles, pick them wisely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's that thing is like, they know what I do. My dad has asked me how it's going. My mom kind of listens and doesn't ask more questions. He did ask me, funnily enough, that's not a word, how we keep from talking about politics on our podcast. And I was like, well, we talk about women's issues. So, it's not always about the election.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said. Like, I kept it neutral as possible without saying, no, we talk about it. But also, we talk about it in the sense of, like, I'm very far left and don't agree with either politicians to a certain degree. Like, I think democracy is safer under one specific candidate than the other. We've talked about that. And that's where, like, picking that battle, I'm willing to vote for the person who's at least allowing us to disagree with the issues at hand instead of the one who's saying they're going to take the army and shut down anybody who disagrees with them. Absolutely. But in trying to leave that as the thinly veiled, like, hey, let's not talk about this, because I don't think you understand what feminism is if you think that we don't talk about politics.
Right.
But that kind of ended that. And then, interestingly, it jumped into, I had told my mother a while ago, who I've talked about my story, my adoption story a little bit with my parents and my mother really feeling like she was called by God to adopt a child, not necessarily because she was trying to save someone, but like she really felt like this is something that she's supposed to do. Like this is one of the things that she's supposed to do. And then like how she loved this one organization that she used, the woman who created it, and all these things. Like she idealized them and to a certain extent. And I came back with, hey, I was trying to find my records, trying to look at some of my adoption stuff, asking more questions, looking through my identity. And she made mention of something, and she brought up this old time tale, which a lot of Christian people do with good intent. They gave you up for a better life. All these things. Also the same like anti-abortion stuff, give them a chance, all these things, whatever. But this type of rhetoric. And I was like, okay, just an FYI, here's the truth. Did you know? And I had to, this is one of those moments I'm like, okay, this is something I think she can handle maybe, that the organizations that I was adopted from is in a lawsuit because adoptees have found out that they actually didn't get permission from a lot of the parents or guardians in their adoption and essentially stole kids as a way of profit for South Korea. And that the South Korean government is having to answer to that now. So she was kind of like, no, that's not what happened with you. That's not what happened. And I was like, grandmother, which I was given to the orphanage by my grandmother, my biological grandmother. I don't know if she had permission or not. That part I don't know. To the orphanage to be adopted out and relinquished custody. She technically does not have that right. As I looked at the records, there's no signature, there's no names, there's nothing. There's nothing other than my birth certificate I got after I came to the U.S. There's nothing outside of what orphanage or children's home, but at the time it was called an orphanage, I was located in. This was been months ago. So I left that alone. My mom was kind of confused. And she's like, but not you, but not this organization. I was like, yeah. So she found something popped up on her search, like on her, For You page type of thing for, Google when they show you different trends. Mm-hmm. They popped up for her and it was about the South Korean adoptee lawsuit. She started reading it and her and my dad have been talking about it. And they asked me, that's one of the first things they asked me when I saw them over the weekend, which by the way, I went to just see them. I was able to get out of not seeing the family, just FYI. And she brought that up and she's like, tell us about it. And I kind of had to essentially let them know my personal story, but also trying to ease it for them as to not feel guilty. Because she's like, my mom literally said, my heart sank when I read this, especially when I think about your parents. I'm like, that's not it. I don't know. What I'm saying to you is I don't know what this is happening. And it was the first time I ever said the words parents, my father, my mother, when I was referencing biological parents versus my adopted parents. But I was saying this to my adopted parents. It was such an odd moment of me having to backtrack and restate my biological parents so that my mother and my father, my adoptive parents, did not feel like I was cutting them out like that. You know what I mean? Like I was misidentifying them in my life because they are my parents. Like I go back to this old thing and they were very understanding. They were very open. They wanted to hear more. They were very open to the fact that I called it human trafficking. And they're like, you're right. That's what it is. So we had a moment. This was one of those moments where like, maybe I can talk to them about these issues. So I promise this is all coming together. Maybe I can talk about this issue because even though it took a long time for my mom to accept what I was saying to her, as in saying adoption was not necessarily a saving grace, it may have been a criminal act. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm not grateful, and I'm so thankful to be here. Again, I know there are those who are going to attack. I don't think the listeners, I don't think y'all would. But there are those on the outside that I've seen attack adoptees for having this type of conversation, saying that I'm being grateful or accusing people like me of being ungrateful. But that conversation is a really deep conversation, and you have to unlearn a conservative Christian ideological thought process that you are saving someone because God called you to do something, when in actuality, you don't know what the flip side of it was. And a lot of the times people take advantage of good people. People take advantage of those in hardships. and marginalized communities. That's a bigger point of this conversation. So with that, the fact that my mom came back and had this conversation with me, had sat down with my father and explained that to him to a certain extent, did give me a moment of pause of like, maybe I can talk about these things. But at the same time, remembering having a traumatic moment where we sat in a public restaurant with her face changing in a way that made me feel not ostracized, not necessarily hated, but it was like she knew it too. Like it's, when I say her face changed in such a way that my face was so shocked that she knew, she told me later when we tried to talk a little bit about that moment of when she like lost it on me for being a part of this podcast, that she messed up. Like she allowed her hatred, her ideology that was formed by Fox News, as she told me, and Newsmax, and projected it onto me, someone who she, you know, loves and cares for, that she messed up. But having that moment so like printed in my brain pushes away from me to having another talk. Like, you know, trying to gauge what I can talk to my family about without losing them. These times, like, it's always been kind of odd as I was walking away from my Christianity, walking away from my religious beliefs, to finding what I think is a better path for me, to these extremes of having to have conversations where it makes them uncomfortable and having to ask them to unlearn, or asking them just to recognize that these things are not implicitly true and holy and pure.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, it's a lot to manage. And I feel that so many of us, so many listening, can relate to what you're saying, but you have the added layers. Like, but that idea of managing other people's emotions and how they're going to react, which should be, we should be able to have those conversations and disagree, but it feels like it's reached such a pitch. You can't have these conversations about something so important to you. You can't have these moments with someone. You're avoiding being with people, like, because it's gotten so polarized, and a lot of it I do think is, I think you were right to be like, don't get her on Facebook. Like, I think a lot of it is the stuff people are consuming, and they're not realizing the pain or the silence that they might be inflicting.
Right. And, you know, I have to come back with, they also think I'm lost. They think I'm lost. I think that's the best perspective to put it. And so they feel like they've lost me in some way. And in that same route, they're trying to protect their relationship too with me. There's a lot happening. And as this comes out on Thursday, it'll be after the 2024, technically after voting day. And nothing may change, and we may be in upheaval. We have no idea. We're prepping.
Nope.
We're prepping
I feel
over
like
here.
Schrodinger's cat right now. Could go either way.
Trying to gauge the future, but at the same time trying to protect not only my mental health and my emotional health, but a relationship that I love. Like, that is precious to me. My family is precious to me, and they are my family. And as many things as we disagree on, I know they will be there for me if things are bad. They know when things are bad, I'm there for them. The minute they're in the hospital, I'm with them. Like it may again, my brother and I, who are not my oldest brother and I, who are not the closest. Like even from childhood, we were not close. There's a pretty big age gap between us anyway. He knows that if he were ever in trouble, I will be there, and I know the same thing. As much as we disagree with each other, which I think is the part that another part to this that really baffles me is that as loving as they are and as accepting as they are on a personal level, like my niece has tested their boundaries a lot by bringing a lot of LGBTQ queer people to with them, like openly trans, openly like non-binary, and I love that for her. And they loved them. My parents love on them. They think they're odd. They will say, like they'll make the whole boomer comment about them essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But they accept them. They hug them before they leave. They make sure they're fed. They make sure they had a good time. They make sure that they can come with her anytime they want. But on like a bigger voting level, they don't think that rights are important for them. Like that's the other part that I'm like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't understand. And I think my family was ready for me to come out, anxious about it.
Yeah.
But they were waiting. Then they were ready. They were prepping themselves.
Yeah.
And making sure that I knew that I was still welcome. Like even with all of that. But they still on a bigger issue, key issue platform, think that that is wrong. It's just such a divide to me that it throws me off because, like I said, like as much as I hate, as much as the policies they seem to like agree with, they don't on a personal level, and it's odd to me.
That is odd, but I think a lot. Again, that's like we've talked about that before. When you're like, I don't like gay people except this one that I know. They're cool. I think people are pretty capable of doing that, but it's strange to see it in action because you're like, I don't know how you can't translate. I have a friend who she riles her family up, but she was asking them like, what is it? What is it? Why will you vote for him? When I'm telling you all of this stuff that impacts me and hurts me and my friends and all of this. And they were like, the economy. And she was like, well, it doesn't, what? The economy, he doesn't help. But they just have this belief in the economy.
Oh, I love they talk about immigration. And then I had to that was a part of that conversation too with my family because I know immigration is a big sticking point for even those who are immigrants. Anyway, and I was like, I was almost deported. And then having to explain like a lot of adoptees are deported because the adoptive family doesn't do it correctly and didn't realize that they're doing things incorrectly. And they're like, what? But we did. And they went through a whole like mind game of trying to remember what I'm talking about. But I'm like, but these are the laws that actually help enforce kicking adoptees out. But you don't think about this.
Yeah. That's what scares me a lot about conversations I get into with people about politics is I'm like, but
and also, unfortunately, I disagree with like VP Harris's stance on immigration.
That's the rough. But see, we could at least, like you said, push that administration and not.
Or at least we can argue with them and then at least have them talk about it. But the fact is, I'm like, honestly, she's probably just as like staunch on some of the immigration policies as you want Trump to be. He's just making up excuses and acting like he's going to shoot them at the wall. That's what you like. The hearing of violence, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. It's, yeah, we're recording this the day before, so
if you hear the fear and the doom in our voices. I mean, honestly, as a podcast that has marginalized people, queer people, people of color, we're frightened.
Yeah.
And this does affect our relationships.
It does it does infect and impact our relationships. And I've had at least 3 people text me today before we started recording that were saying, like, I'm scared. I don't think I can see my family anymore. Trump is elected. Like, people are scared. So it's a real it's a rough time right now.
So, fam, we understand.
Yeah.
We understand. And we're here. The other episodes that come, we'll be together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of the strange things about podcasting is we're recording this after the election. I mean, we're recording this before the election, so you'll listen to it after. Who knows? But I'm sure that the emotions and feelings will not be gone. And probably we won't know the answer by then anyway.
We won't know.
But isn't that fun?
Yay.
Well, again, we do appreciate you. I know it is so rough for so many people right now. And so many of you are experiencing the same things that Samantha's talking about. So we are here. We love you.
Loves.
Yes. And you can contact us. You can email us at stuffydmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff One Ever Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, who has a birthday coming up.
Yeah.
Our executive producer Maya and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production by iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.